all good to go? Good morning, everybody. Overnight, models have confirmed that a cyclone will cross the southeast coast of Queensland sometime in late Thursday afternoon into the early hours of Friday morning. We are facing the potential that a cyclone could in fact cross the coast on high tide in the middle of the night. And we're asking Queenslanders to prepare for that. And we are here today to tell you that we are preparing for that right across all levels of government and agencies to support this state in a difficult period of time. A cyclone warning zone it remains in place, and it has tightened overnight in the area between Double Island Point all the way to the border. And that impact zone will continue to narrow as the cyclone approaches, and we will update Queenslanders as that occurs. Overnight and this morning, councils have done a lot of work in terms of the storm tide mapping. And we're joined also today as well by the Prime Minister. We're joined by the Lord Mayor, and I'll be going to the Gold Coast shortly after this, and we will have members speaking with councils right across the area. It's critical that people make themselves aware of the storm tide zones and the impacts on them and their property. You can reach this information on the disaster.qld.gov.au website. I'm going to say that again. It's disaster.qld.gov.au. When you go onto that platform, you will see your local government's dashboard there, and you can go and click on it. And those councils are doing the work to show Queenslanders those impact zones and what it means to you. Flood warnings. Flood warnings remain in place from the Mary River all the way to the border and beyond, and minor to major flooding is expected in the coming days. I want to speak to Queenslanders who may need to evacuate, and I'll unpack a little bit about that. So local governments have put in place evacuation centres. They are open in many cases or in the process of opening very soon, and all of that information remains on that website, on that disaster.qld.gov.au website, attached to the local council. If you are in a storm tide zone, or if you're in an area where you know there's riverine flooding, you really need to consider and think about your evacuation plan now. We recommend that you stay with family and friends. If that is possible, that is the best place for you to go if you evacuate from one of those zones. If you don't have that option available to you, you may look to go to accommodation like a motel, but those evacuation centres exist if you don't have any other options. It should be a last resort, but they are there and they are in place, and we're making sure that Queenslanders are aware of that as this unfolds. The reason why it's so important to stay connected and heed the warnings is we're working with councils across those local government areas and those zones, going door to door, door knocking, and advising people who might be in those evacuation zones to make a plan and consider your alternate arrangements in the hours and the days ahead. If somebody's knocking at your door, they're there because they care about you, and they're there because they care about Queenslanders, and we want you to listen to those warnings and make your arrangements in place. If you're not in one of these zones, if you're not in the storm tide zone or one of those riverine flooding areas, the safest place for you is in your home. And that's the vast majority of Queenslanders. Right now, the best thing you can do is prepare your home. Go around the yard and clean up anything that loose debris, or if there's branches hanging over the house, now's the time to get rid of them. If you can fortify your home and remove those items, the safest place for you will be in your home. And I know this is, in many cases, for many Queenslanders, the first time they have experienced this, but I want to assure you that you will get through this if you stay connected, if you do the right things, and if you put in place those preparations now. We've repeatedly been speaking about getting ready over the last few days. We're now into the phase where it's hours rather than days, but you've still got time. You've got time to plan an evacuation route if you're in one of those zones. You've got time to clean up your home and make sure you've got the essentials if you're not in those areas. It's really important that every Queenslander plays their role. This is a very rare event for southeast Queensland, I acknowledge that, but I'm asking Queenslanders to take it seriously, and I want you to know that we are taking it seriously. And we have every faith that Queenslanders will respond. And whilst it has been many decades since this part of the state experienced it, I have seen the way that the southeast has handled flooding events, and I've seen the way that Queenslanders have dealt with all forms of challenges like this. And I have every faith that the state will come through this. We're asking a very large population, to stay connected and be prepared. And as we get the information, we'll share it with you as the impacts become known. So as we know what the intensity looks like, where it will cross, what time, we will continue to share that. One thing is for certain, and that is that there will be a cyclone across the coast, and all of the models have pointed towards that for some time, and we're asking you to take it seriously, and we'll continue to give you the information to be able to do that and keep you and your family safe. Just want to get on to a few of the priorities today. There's been 68 evacuations from South Stradbroke Island overnight. More are happening today, right now. The windows for this to occur is closing, and it's closing fast, but we are working with particularly those vulnerable people on those communities to be able to make sure that people are safe. Again, whatever decision people have taken, whether they have relocated or whether they're staying on those islands, we're going to support you through this. And you need to know that we are serious about it. And once this system is crossing, we will continue to articulate those messages. For those who are in those low-lying areas or who are vulnerable, we will do all we can to ensure you stay connected. Now, I mentioned the door knocking. We've got nearly 500 Queensland Police recruits who are out and about, getting their first taste of community service before they graduate. We've got people from Fire and Rescue, the SES, and councils across this area have done a marvellous amount of work ensuring that people are there to go door to door, but also stay connected on the website. Listen to your media platform of choice. Talk to your friends. Make sure your neighbours know about it. Now's a great time to get to know your neighbours if you don't, and talk to them about it. It's really important that people understand that the threat is real. Be prepared, and to know that we are doing the work to be prepared as well, and we'll continue to do that. We've had a particular focus on nursing homes, aged care, health services, those sleeping rough, and we're doing all we can to make sure that we get those people out of harm's way as quickly as we can. There are some evacuations of some of those low-lying nursing homes that are being planned and will be done during the course of the day. And in the case of those homeless, we continue to go and reach out and offer accommodation to anyone who is there, and we will continue to make that offer to those in the hours ahead. To give Queenslanders some assurance and some confidence about how seriously we're taking this, I just want to go through some of the pre-deployments that we have done. And I've spoken to you in recent days about getting generators ahead of the game, making sure we've got health staff on some of those islands, for example. I've spoken about working with the telecommunications to make sure they've got backup power. We've spoken about increasing the bandwidth capacity for bulk messages to go out. But here's a snapshot of some of the things that have unfolded in very recent days and hours. Rescue vessels have been deployed to places like the Gold Coast to make sure that some of those people living in those storm-tide areas, like those canals, that we have resources at places like the Gold Coast and the Redlands and beyond. Brisbane, we have rescue assets positioned along the river. 180 swiftwater rescue personnel right here in the impacted area. Additional Queensland Fire Department recruits have also been tasked, along with those Queensland Police Service recruits I spoke of yesterday. Aircraft, including helicopters with winch capabilities, are on standby. The ADF resources are now also ready to respond, and the ADF's response, quite frankly, has been excellent, and I'll get the Prime Minister to comment on that in a moment. We have 1,000 Ergon Energy crews ready to respond once the system goes through, and partnering with that, we have some private contractors who will work with them to clear the debris so they can reconnect power lines, because restoring electricity in these events is such a huge, huge thing that needs to occur to enable the recovery to move on. So I just want to remind Queensland, I've been speaking about 3 phases of this. Spoke about the first, which was the big surf and the erosion. We have seen that in multiple places of the coast, and I spoke at length about the risk to the Caloundra community because of the breakthrough at the northern part of Bribie. We are now moving into the second phase, and that's that damaging and destructive winds. And Queenslanders will increasingly start to see that overnight and into tomorrow. And it's important that as that system approaches and crosses, that people stay ready for it and do all the preparations ahead of it. And then it'll move into the third phase. And I really want Queenslanders to understand how important that is. And that third phase is that significant rain, that major and moderate flooding that will come from it. I have seen how well South East Queenslanders have responded to flooding in the past. This system will certainly challenge large parts of our coastline, and it is important that, as you do with any flooding event, that you take the precautions for you and your family, and that involves actively knowing the things that you need to do ahead of it. But a system like this does generate significant rain, and it is important that people are ready for that third phase long after those destructive winds disappear and beyond into the weekend. Schools. Schools will be closed in the impacted area tomorrow and Friday, and we've articulated that ahead, the day ahead. We urge people to, if you've got any questions, to go onto the disaster.qld.gov website, and there's a link to the school closures portal that I've spoken of. But schools are obviously open today. They will be closed tomorrow and Friday. Early learning centres, again, on that platform, we do provide the opportunity for those third-party early centres to communicate that. The Prime Minister has an announcement which is very good news for parents in that space, and I'll let him do that in a moment. Public transport. Last services for public transport will run tonight, scheduled to conclude today, so there will not be public transport on Thursday and Friday as a minimum. But people should stay across the disaster website, because obviously if the weather deteriorates this afternoon, they should be watching that. But public transport is slated to go all through today, but it will not be operational on Thursday and Friday. Queenslanders need to be prepared for major roads and bridges to be closed. Obviously, once winds reach 90 kilometres an hour, that's the trigger point, and I talk about things like the Gateway, and it's important that people stay up to date with that information, and we'll continue to provide it. Aviation and airports, as I've explained, they are a matter for both the airport and the airline. They work together. The BOM gives them great access to information, and they will communicate directly with the passengers, and we'll play our role as well as that comes to hand. I've just received moments ago information that after midday today there is a red alert for vessels. That means that no vessel will be allowed on the water without permission from the Brisbane Harbour Master. So to be clear, all boats on moorings must not leave position between Double Island to Coolangatta from midday today, and that information has just come to hand, and we are sharing it as we get it. Health services. Elective surgeries, as we said yesterday, have continued today and will continue today. They will not be elective surgeries on Thursday and Friday, but I want Queenslanders to know our health system is geared up and ready to support those who need emergency care. Generators are in place, staff have been rostered, and I really want to thank those staff. In fact, I want to thank all staff who are serving people, whether they're across any of the 3 levels of government or whether you're someone stacking supermarket shelves. Thanks very much for what you're doing during a challenging time for you and your family. Aged care services, we're working with providers, and again, the PM will touch on that in a moment. Supermarkets. I mentioned yesterday that the Deputy Premier signed the ability for that restocking to occur 24/7 for 2 weeks from last night. That work is underway and will continue, and it gives supermarkets the opportunities to try to restock vital things that are needed at the moment. And we urge them to do everything they can, and we urge residents to play your role as well in making sure that you go about your important purchases in a manner that is supportive of the people who work there and of your neighbours. Finally, We're here today to tell you that we are taking it seriously and we are ready, and we want you to be ready as well. And if you are, I have every faith that Queenslanders will get through this. I've seen these events at the other end of the state, and I know how tough Queenslanders are. And the fact that 3 of us are standing here today with all of the agencies tells you that we are going to be in this in the short, medium and long term, and you will get through this if you listen to messages and if you do the right thing by you and your family, and we'll be there to see it through. PM.
Well, thanks very much, Premier, and indeed I join with you in telling those watching this broadcast that all levels of government are working together. I met with Premier Minns yesterday morning, and I travelled to Queensland late yesterday, and we had a very late meeting, I've got to say, Premier, last night to receive the first briefing, and then I was able to attend along with my Minister, Jenny McAllister, who has been here for a couple of days now, to be on hand, first hand, to ensure that the national government, the Commonwealth's response, is in lockstep with the response of state governments. I do urge those watching this broadcast to listen carefully to the words that Premier Crisafulli has just said just now. Prepare, take this seriously. This is a rare event. The governments across the board are taking this seriously, and Queenslanders, as well as those on the north coast of New South Wales, need to do so as well. The Commonwealth wants to reiterate something that I know the Premiers have spoken directly this morning as well. There's no Tweed border here. This is not recognised by the cyclone, and it certainly shouldn't be recognised by government's responses. And to assure people as well, there's been New South Wales people present in the briefings this morning, and the same thing is happening with Queenslanders being present at New South Wales briefings, and the National Emergency Management Agency's headquarters in Canberra will ensure that there's that coordination as well. And I thank Brendan Moon for the extraordinary work, a great Queenslander, for the work that he does through NEMA as well. My government is on the ground, and we will provide whatever resources are required. Stay safe by listening carefully to the emergency warnings. I said yesterday that we'd put the ADF on standby. We've now received a formal request, and the ADF is now engaged as of right now. The childcare subsidy issue, which was raised by the Premier as well, we have declared through Minister Clare, who's with me here in Queensland, a period of emergency from today for childcare services in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales at risk from this cyclone. 15 local government areas are impacted. What the period of emergency does is allow for the following support to flow to services and families elected. The service can continue to get childcare subsidy. The service can waive gap fees for families, and children will get unlimited allowable absences for the duration of the period of emergency. In plain speak, this means that families won't be out of pocket for the event that is occurring. Today, I also reiterate that we'll provide an additional 250,000 sandbags to the Queensland Government. We put in place a national supply. 125,000 of those have already been delivered. That's on top of the 80,000 that were delivered by the ADF already. We're also ensuring that northern New South Wales is ready, and I know that Premier Minns is currently travelling to northern New South Wales. The Commonwealth is also pre-positioning heavy lift helicopters from our National Aerial Firefighting Fleet. Sikorsky S-61 is being deployed to Coffs Harbour. The UH-60 Black Hawk will be pre-positioned in Bundaberg in coming days. We've activated the Australian Government Disaster Response Plan, a crisis coordination team, and deployed liaison officers. We have convened the National Coordination Mechanism to assist with the coordination of the Commonwealth Government response. And what that means is that very quickly Services Australia can be on the ground, making sure that people get that assistance when they need it. This has been effective, I've got to say. Unfortunately, there's a lot of experience dealing with the recent event in Townsville and Ingham in northern Queensland, and last January dealing with the events around Cairns and Cape York. The National Emergency Management Agency will convene today another National Coordination Mechanism meeting. What that does is it brings together industry and business, including supermarkets, banking and freight companies, telcos, insurance companies, all together as well, to ensure that there is a seamless response, to ensure that industry is working hand in hand with the levels of government to make sure that we look after people. I say to people, I reiterate the Premier's call for people to take this event seriously, to listen to the advice, to keep up to date. This is a moving weather event. Fortunately, in the briefing today, it's been moving slower than some other previous events have. What that has enabled is for preparations to be on hand. And those preparations, the hard work has been done. And I want to conclude by thanking the Commonwealth personnel, including Australian Defence Force personnel who are involved, NEMA, but also all of the state agencies who are doing such extraordinary work. And lastly, but certainly not least, our wonderful volunteers through the SES and others who always, at the worst of times for Australia, we see the best of the Australian character. People helping out their neighbours. I saw it firsthand during the devastating floods that have occurred here in southeast Queensland. We see it time after time, and I pay tribute to all those people who are showing their care for others at this difficult time. I think we're going to now hear from the Lord Mayor.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Premier, you can see here all three levels of government working together. This is not just happening today, it's been happening consistently all the way through as we gear up. It's been a good, rigorous and strong process. There's been great communication, there's been great cooperation as well. Last night, the Brisbane City Council released our latest flood modelling based on the information we've received from the BOM. We have released that to the public. It is available on our website on the dashboard. People can search their property address to see the level of risk that might be there in this particular event. Obviously, this is a changing situation. It has changed in the last 48 hours. No doubt it will change going forward. We use the latest information we get from the Bureau to update our modelling. That process will be ongoing. If we receive new information, we'll plug that into our model, we'll update the modelling. At this point in time, the highest risk suburbs in Brisbane include Nudgee Beach, Brighton, Windsor, Ashgrove, Morningside and Rocklea. Almost 20,000 properties have the potential to be impacted by some form of inundation or flooding. Obviously, a number of those suburbs are along the Moreton Bay or seaside reach of Brisbane, but there are other suburbs inland as well that could potentially be impacted, areas like Ashgrove and Rocklea, Windsor as well. We are advising people to make a plan in those areas. As the Premier said, the first option will be to stay with family and friends. You will be safe and more comfortable by staying with family and friends. However, we do have options for people that don't have that available to them. We are initiating a cyclone refuge centre at the RNA showgrounds. This will be available for people who have no other options. It will be a very basic facility. This is not a facility with beds. It's not designed for the long term. It's designed to protect people's physical safety during the most intense part of the cyclone. We've modelled this on the cyclone shelters that are used up north in northern Queensland, and also the Gold Coast is using a similar approach. As we move forward, depending on the extent of flooding that occurs, we will also be opening evacuation centres. And these are the type of centres that Brisbane residents would be more familiar with as a result of previous floods. And so in the first instance, it's about physical safety during the high gale force winds of the cyclone. That's the cyclone refuge. Then we will move to evacuation centres that will provide more services and a longer term option. But I repeat again, in the first instance, the best option is to lodge with family and friends, and that will give people the opportunity to be safe and comfortable and have a range of facilities available. But we do have facilities that will be available for people that don't have that option. I also just wanted to say that I get a lot of questions from people about what tomorrow and the next day might look like. Now, when there has been flooding in Brisbane in the past, some parts of the city have been impacted, other parts have not. And people from the parts that have not been impacted often go out and about on the roads to see the damage. And they go out to support their neighbours as well. This will not be possible, and this is not recommended over the next 2 days, and even the next 3 days. If you are driving on the road during gale force winds, anything can happen. It can be an incredibly dangerous situation. There can be items that have become projectiles that can crash into you. There can be fallen power lines as a result of fallen trees that can electrocute you. And so people should not be out tomorrow and the next day at the very least. It is a personal safety matter, and we're certainly encouraging everyone in the community tomorrow, Friday, please stay indoors. It is the safest place for you. If that is in your home, stay at home. But certainly we encourage people not to be out and about on the roads. Curiosity is a reality, but tomorrow and the next day is not the opportunity for curiosity. We need people to stay at home to keep them safe. I don't want to see one single person electrocuted. I don't want to see one single person impacted by flying debris. And the best way we can make that happen is for everyone to stay at home for the next 2 days at the very least.
Thank you. Tropical Cyclone Alfred is a Category 2 system and is currently 400 kilometres east of Brisbane. And it is moving west at around 11 kilometres per hour towards southeast Queensland. It is forecast to cross the southeast Queensland coast at this stage, most likely between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, overnight Thursday into Friday morning. A Category 2 system means winds near the centre up to 95 kilometres per hour, with gusts up to 130 kilometres per hour. So that is destructive winds. And these will be concentrated around the southern side of the system. A tropical cyclone warning is in place for Double Island Point right through to the Queensland-New South Wales border, and in fact extending into Queensland. Coastal hazards for large waves and abnormally high tides remain in place, and there's also a severe weather warning for very heavy rainfall, very heavy to intense rainfall. I'll work through some of the impacts we're expecting. I mentioned the damaging winds with gusts up to 90 kilometres per hour, which may develop very late today and into early Thursday. Increasing to destructive winds, so that's up to 130 kilometres per hour gusts, as Alfred approaches the coast and crosses later on Thursday and into Friday. This is particularly for exposed locations around the coast and also the adjacent elevated inland areas. Large swells and powerful waves have been observed along the Queensland coast for several days now, with severe coastal erosion and inundation happening. This will continue and likely get worse as the system approaches and makes landfall. A coastal hazard warning for damaging surf and abnormally high tides remains in place. Tropical Cyclone Alfred is expected to produce a significant storm surge around the southern flank of the system. This means that as it crosses, likely near the high tide that happens in the early hours of Friday morning, we will see elevated sea levels between 0.5 to 1 metre above the normal highest tides that people see. There is some modelling that indicates it may even be slightly higher than that for locations around the South Bay of Redlands and the Gold Coast. In terms of rainfall, Tropical Cyclone Alfred is expected to produce heavy to locally intense rainfall over southeast Queensland through Thursday, Friday and into Saturday, with daily rainfall totals of 200 to 400 millimetres. So this could mean the event causes totals over 800 millimetres. This sort of rainfall is expected to produce life-threatening flash and riverine flooding, and widespread minor to major riverine flood watches exist for the Mary River and creeks, the rivers of the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast, and the Upper and Lower Brisbane River, as well as the Logan and Albert rivers. It is likely as the system moves inland that those flood watches and warnings will be updated and extended inland with the system. So in summary, the coastal crossing of Tropical Cyclone Alfred presents a very rare and hazardous event for southeast Queensland. The wave, wind, rainfall, and particularly the storm surge present significant risks. This situation is still evolving, and the Bureau will update our warnings for all of these hazards as the system approaches the coast. So I urge the community to stay up to date with the latest warnings via the Bureau webpage and the Bureau app, as well as staying alert for messages from emergency services. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to talk about my operational priorities for today. My first priority are those areas subject to our storm surge, and that's those areas that have been identified by our local councils on their dashboards. We are continuing to have our emergency services personnel in those areas today, door knocking those residents and asking those people to ensure that you have an evacuation plan in place. If you're given that advice to leave that area from either our personnel or an emergency alert that may be issued, you should take that advice. Whether that be today or over the next coming days, those personnel and those alerts are there to keep you safe. We also continue modelling and planning regarding the extensive rainfall that we're expecting as part of this event, and we are expecting to see severe flash flooding and up to major riverine flooding right across the southeast corner in the coming days. And it's this flash flooding and later the riverine flooding that we urge residents to also be aware of your flood risk for your premises. As we've heard, the councils have that on their dashboards and you can search your premise. And you need to make that decision as to how you're going to deal with that risk, and the emergency services are here to assist. As we heard, evacuation centres, centres of refuge, will commence opening by our local governments today, and this information will be available on the disaster dashboard. Today I've put in place preemptive disaster declarations for the disaster districts between Noosa and the Gold Coast, including Noosa, Sunshine Coast, Moreton, Brisbane, Redlands, Logan, Scenic Rim and the Gold Coast. And I'll consider putting further declarations in as required as this event evolves. These declarations were put in place to ensure our emergency services personnel have the appropriate powers to keep our community safe, should they be carrying out evacuations or responding to emergency situations. The declarations also allow our emergency services personnel to control the movement of people in and out of these disaster-declared areas. My next priority today is ensuring that my rescue and response capability is in place across our disaster at-risk areas and across all our emergency services, including aviation, fire, police, ambulance, SES, our surf lifesaving and our Marine Rescue Queensland are available to deploy to those impacted areas, and we have pre-positioned our resources on the latest advice from the Bureau, because we know over the next coming hours and days the conditions will start to deteriorate. I've also recently progressed formal requests to the Commonwealth to ensure assistance from the Australian Defence Force with respect to high clearance vehicles, as well as personnel and aviation capability, and we're continuing that conversation as to when they should be available and where they will be positioned. I've also engaged with New South Wales to ensure that we have effective coordination of our resources and assistance between the two states so that we can keep everybody safe. The emergency services have been extremely busy over the last 24 hours, ensuring that all of our vulnerable cohorts, including our aged care, our nursing homes, our health facilities, our rough sleepers, have been able to be contacted, and that suitable arrangements have been put into place or available to those people to ensure they're kept safe. My message is clear. Over the next couple of days, we will see, as we've heard from the Bureau, the weather system to deteriorate. We need Queenslanders to stay in contact with messaging. If you're given advice to leave your premises, please heed that advice, as the worst time for you to be leaving your premise is in the middle of this event. It puts you at risk and it puts our emergency services personnel at risk. And as always, if you need that urgent assistance, please call 000. Thank you.
Storm surge modelling.
Yeah.
Is that based on the 800 millimetres above the highest astronomical time? Is that what it's...
Well, I can get Matt back, but Matt said the modelling they're running is between 0.5 and 1 metre, but they've also plugged in for a couple of locations to be slightly higher. So if you wanted to make sure have a crack.
So the way the storm surge modelling works is effectively to say what is the most likely scenario, and we publish that information. And then you consider if all the factors line up. That means that the high tide, the system intensity, so the tropical cyclone intensity, the winds around the system, as well as the timing and location of the crossing. So if all of those things line up, what is the worst case scenario? And when we run that, we do get up into that 0.8 of a metre and possibly just over a metre for some of those areas. It will, again, depend on exactly where the system crosses. Does it cross at high tide on Friday morning? That is still a possibility, but it is very dependent on the timing and the exact location. So we monitor that very closely and we'll update it and we'll push that modelling out to all the emergency services agencies and the councils that need that.
We heard from New South Wales they're expecting a 2 a.m. possible coastal crossing. Is that still something that the Bureau is indicating?
Yes, certainly. It looks like around midnight on Thursday and into the early hours of Friday morning is the most likely time for a coastal crossing at this stage. And as I said earlier, between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, but there's still an uncertainty area that extends outside of those areas to the border and up towards the Sunshine Coast.
Is the Bureau going to be updating their, information more regularly now?
Absolutely. So we've gone into the warning phase, which means updates every 3 hours. And as the system approaches the coast, it is likely that will move into hourly updates to give people the latest information as quickly as possible.
Is the Bureau considering that the cyclone might intensify towards Cat 3, or is it still going to yo-yo between the 2 and the 1?
It's expected to remain as a Category 2 as it approaches and at the higher end of that category. There is a small percentage of our modelling that does alert the risk of it strengthening further, but we'll watch that very closely. At this stage, the most likely outcome is we'll have a Category 2 system across the coast.
Prime Minister, a question for you. Sure. On the timing of election, you've said as Cyclone Alfred nears the coast that you're focusing on governing. There hasn't been a Prime Minister in recent history that has called an immediate election after a natural disaster. Will you rule out going to the Governor-General in the next 7 days?
My focus is on governing. That's what I'm here. I'm continuing to govern. I know I get asked every day for the last year about election timing. I'm focused on governing. That's the sole focus that I have.
But isn't it important that Queenslanders know that you'll be in charge and not electioneering in their greatest time of need?
I'm here working with Premier Crisafulli, absolutely in lockstep. There is no political parties here. There are no borders between New South Wales and Queensland, just Australians working together.
And how long will you be here for?
We're working out whether I can go to northern New South Wales after this. But I arrived yesterday afternoon. I'm due to go back to New South Wales later today.
Just a question on the bridges,
Thank you. Thank you. And look, if let's just focus on this, and then afterwards we can take any other questions. But thank you very much.
Is it likely that bridges could shut, some of the major ones, Story Gateway, could shut at midnight, or do we wait until those 90k winds are registered?
They're done by their private entities, but they will work with the Bureau to get that information. So as Matt's updated, that'll be done based on as the system gets closer. but at this stage those winds aren't at that capacity yet.
You talked about this window of opportunity rapidly closing.
Yes.
What is the latest time can we expect
Well,
that to close?
the Minister and I will address you again this afternoon, but I've got this message to Queenslanders who are in that zone. Make your evacuation plan now, and if you have the option to go and stay with family and friends, take that option. And the councils are updating that modelling, and I think the Lord Mayor outlined that. As they get the information, they'll keep updating it. But my strong advice is look at that information and make an informed decision for you and your family. And in the end, property, items, they run a distant second to people and to your family. And you should take the safe option and listen to the advice. We'll keep providing it in a calm and clear way, and we'll keep doing it more regularly as well. And so we'll speak to you again today, and we'll talk about what the modelling looks like. And as the system comes through the coast, I'll be here and I'll talk to you as often as you need. But I'll just make the point. If it was the case that this system, which has strengthened, was to cross on high tide in the middle of the night and you're in that storm surge, the last place you want to be is in your home. So now's the time.
What other capacity for evacuation centres in the local government?
Yeah, we're working with councils, and councils will bring them onto line, and they will also bring in refuges as well afterwards. So that there'll be capacity there. Our overwhelming advice to people is if it is possible to go and stay with a mate or a family member, or even if you do have the means and the capacity to go to a hotel, it's a far better option than an evacuation centre. But they're there for people who are vulnerable and who might be new to the area and don't have another option. They'll be there for you, and every council right now has put that in place. Every council.
We know Morton had a homeless issue.
Yeah.
Has there been people going around to those areas
Yes.
to their houses?
Good question. Yes, the Department of Housing has gone around to all of the people, all the vulnerable people sleeping rough. All of them have been offered that short-term accommodation, and we'll continue to go back there and continue to make that offer for those who haven't accepted it.
How many people are still out there, though? How many people are still on the streets, though? How many people said no?
Well, the answer is quite a few, and that's why we have to keep going back and redoubling our efforts. And this morning at the disaster meeting, we had the Housing Minister on, and I indicated to him to redouble his efforts to do that.
A number of charities have said there's still not enough accommodation for those sleepers that are sleeping rough. What can be done?
Well, I can tell you what can be done. We can build more housing, but that's a long-term play. In the short term, we have to help vulnerable people. And the Minister's put steps in place to make sure that every person who is vulnerable, who is sleeping rough, will be able to have that short-term accommodation. And then we redouble our efforts to do a few things, and that is build an adequate supply of social housing, make sure that we have an adequate supply to get people into the market, and also attract the community housing sector to this state. And that's a long-term play, but in the short term, anyone who's vulnerable, who accepts the offer, will be looked after.
With the red zone for the vessels,
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of jet ski riders,
Yeah.
particularly around Kira. Does that apply to jet skis or
Yep.
just boats? And would you consider sending police out to monitor
Well,
whether or not people need to come
Well,
from the water?
well, my message is the best bit of resources right now for the police is going around advising people who might be in danger to plan an evacuation and to go and deal with that and protect your family. So this information has only just come to hand, and my message to people is please heed it. It's being put in place for a reason, and we'll continue to make sure that people get the information. And look, overwhelmingly, my experience in these events tell me that the vast majority of people do the right thing. And if you give them the information, they will make the right call. And that's our job, and I urge people to listen to it, and I assure you you'll get through it.
How long will the door knocking take for the evacuation area?
There has been an immense amount of resources pooled into it. It's being led at a local government level, but we have offered support right across the board, including with police and fireys and SES personnel, and we'll continue to do that. And I just say to people, there is a range of areas that you can get your advice through. If somebody knocks on your front door, it's a good thing to listen to them. There's also the option that there'll be text messages sent. But in real time, you can get onto the website, and again, disaster.qld.gov.au, and it will show you what is a possible scenario for your your council down to your street, down to your home. And as the Lord Mayor said, that'll continue to be updated, and it's important that does.
Is there advice on the issue of taping this?
Still be possible?
There may be multiple door knockings, but my advice to people is it's definitely, now's the time to be thinking about it, and now's the time to be talking about to your neighbour about it, I urge people to just absorb all that information.
There does seem to be some uncertainty about the advice on taping windows.
Yeah.
Should people be taping windows? If so, how?
I'll hand over to the acting commissioner, but I'll make this point first. The best thing that you can do right now in your home, if you're staying in your home, and that is the vast majority of people, right? So we've outlined the storm surge areas, we've spoken about those riverine flooding areas, but the vast majority of Queenslanders will not be in one of those, and the safest place for you and your family are in your home, and you stay in your home for the duration of the event, and particularly if the eye of the cyclone was to pass over you, that's temporary reprieve. So my strong advice is to stay in your home. But what you do now is the critical factor in staying safe. That loose item that is in the yard and may have been there for too long, taking that away and putting it out of harm's way could mean the difference between it going through your window. And protecting the sanctity of your property is key. So you remove those options for an item to become a projectile, you clear the gutters, you make sure if there's branches hanging over the roof, deal with those now, and that fortifies your home. And Deputy, did you want to add anything to that?
Thanks. Look, with that specific question about taping of windows, Get Ready Queensland, our website, has excellent advice with respect to how to prepare your home. And recently I've been speaking with the CEO of the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, who assures me they've uploaded additional advice for Queenslanders living in South East Corner on cyclone preparation. And that's the best place to get that advice. But the last couple of days I've spoken here about things you can still do, and it's not too late to do it. And the first one is have an evacuation plan in place and decide whether you're going to stay or leave your home, where are you going to go, and when are you going to do it. I want to say again, the time to do it is not in the middle of the event. That is the most risky time, and we've seen that before in Queensland. But there's other basic things, as the Premier has indicated. Preparing your home, getting rid of those loose items. They become projectiles in the wind. Cleaning your gutters out, making sure that you've got communications, your phone chargers charged up, your phone's charged up, making sure that you've looked at alternate power supply. Very basic things like freezing water in your deep freezer now so that you've got some ice to put in the esky if you lose power.
At what point, if any, will authorities forcibly evacuate the most at-risk residents from their home?
Well, you'll see through Queensland, we don't go around and forcibly drag people out of their homes. That's not what we do. We support Queenslanders. We give them all the advice they need to make the decision on whether or not to leave. And police will go around and at a point say to people, you need to leave your home. Now, if those people don't leave their home, we take their details, we understand that they're there, and, as always, we prepare our resources to respond. But my message to Queenslanders is this: that puts you, your family, and us in a really dangerous situation. And, you know, when we're dealing with events like this, they do become dangerous. We've seen events previously where we carried out over 250 rescues off rooftops in one evening. That's really dangerous for us to operate in, and it's really dangerous for you.
Prime Minister, can I just ask if you could talk through the ADF resources that have been made available and what you envisage the role of the ADF for the next couple of days? 3 phases, essentially preparedness. The ADF have already helped with the provision of sandbags and some of the pre-positioning of assets. During the event, ADF can provide advice with the various information that they have and technology that they have available, as well as part of working with NEMA in the national headquarters as well. In recovery, which we've already had a discussion of this morning at the disaster meeting, ADF have a range of skills. They have personnel who are disciplined and hardworking.
they have, in addition to that, particular skills, so that the Olera Creek Bridge, for example, that the Premier and I saw reconstructed was quite remarkable, the skills that they brought to that, a temporary facility which opened up the road, the Bruce Highway between Ingham and Townsville. They're the sort of assets we will make. Whatever assets are requested available, the Australian Defence Force has a role in peacetime as well as in defence of this country. One of the things that the Premier and I'm sure he would agree, it was absolutely extraordinary to see how much those people from the Townsville barracks were not just willing, they were very proud of the work that they were doing, and they will make Australia proud once again during this difficult time.
Obviously, given the nature of this event, is this sort of considered one of the greatest natural disaster threats to Australia in most recent history, given the population and combined risk?
Well, this is a rare event to have a tropical cyclone in an area that is not classified as part of the tropics here in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. That is why this preparatory work is so important. Thanks.
Just on another note, PM, Angus Taylor's announced if the coalition is elected, they'll start task forces.
I'm not.
Is it necessary?
I'm not. I haven't seen what Angus Taylor has said.
He said that
but
if the coalition is elected, they'll announce they'll start task forces to look into government efficiency. Is that necessary?
Today's a day where I've been focused not on Angus Taylor, I've been focused on the needs of Queenslanders and people who live in northern New South Wales.
Last two guys, we do have to get them going.
You've obviously had a number of meetings this morning. What was behind the decision to come up here in person rather than potentially do it remotely?
Premier Crisafulli and I, at risk of damaging both of our careers, get on pretty well. And you can do some things face to face. That's the way I deal with people. And we made the decision to come. We only really decided yesterday. We confirmed that we'd get together last night. And then I wanted to attend to make sure that I was comfortable that all of the Commonwealth support was in place. And so I met with Premier Minns and Premier Crisafulli yesterday. I intend to haven't finalised all these details. I was due to travel to Western Australia on Friday and Saturday. But chances are I intend to stay on the East Coast. NEMA is based in Canberra. That's a good place to monitor what is happening nationally there at NEMA. But our Minister we've been in touch with as well has been on the ground here for a couple of days. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it just